I feel like everyone listening to this, whether they've read or listened to The Anxious Generation, they've definitely heard of it because I truly can't fathom, especially in this like area of life that I live in, I guess, like every parent is talking about this. And I think every single parent is having the conversations or the thought processes around when do my children go online? At what age am I allowing them access to online or a cell phone? And then when does that turn into social media? So I'm really excited to have you here to talk about all of this because I have a lot of questions.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad to be here too. And hello to your audience.
Thank you. I guess I want to start from the beginning. So, within the anxious generation, you guys talk about the great rewiring of childhood, which is actually very hard for me to say because I have R speech impediment. So, that word is extremely difficult. But can you explain to us what that actually is?
Yeah, of course. Maybe just to start, because most people probably know John Haidt. Fewer people know who I am. So I'm the lead researcher for the book, and I've been working with John for the last 5 years. And my story is about going through my own mental health crisis when I was younger, and then kind of expanding from there and just seeing the scope and scale of how there really has been a crisis happening in many countries around the world, all happening around the same time. And that is kind of getting to your question of what is the great rewiring of childhood. The great rewiring is a very short period of time between 2010 and 2015, where we start to see sudden changes in adolescent mental health trends, especially among young adolescent girls, where rates of anxiety, depression, self-harm, and even suicide, um, they don't just rise. There's like an elbow in a lot of the graphs. So there's a very sudden change that's happening to young people. And what we explain and draw out in the book is that it is during this period when kids move from a childhood and an adolescence that's primarily in person, that's primarily embodied, physical, in the real world with other kids, with your friends together. You may have had a flip phone, but you use those flip phones to get together in person. What changed is that by 2015, we now have smartphones in our pockets, constantly connected to the internet. And it's at this point we start to hear that kids are spending almost all of their time online. And so we use our phones not to engage and get together in person, but to stay online. And it's that shift from using technology as a tool to connect in person to using it as a tool essentially to stay in this virtual world. And it is that, and we call that a phone-based childhood.
One of the things, well, I just actually want to ask because I don't know. When you say there's an elbow in the graph, what does that
Mm.
actually mean?
Yeah, so what I'm talking about is when we look at trends like major depressive episodes among teen girls, um, we usually that's tracked every year. And if you look at a graph on a survey on the x-axis, you would have the years. And generally before 2010, um, girls' rates were always a bit higher than boys, but it was generally pretty steady. It was, I think it's somewhere around 7 to 10% of girls who were reporting this. And then right around 2012, it suddenly shoots, the line shoots upwards. So
Got
the
it. So
percentage
like
of
an
girls.
arm like this almost.
Exactly. So
Okay.
yeah. And so by 2021, just about 1 in 3 teen girls are reporting having a major depressive episode in the last year. So we're talking more than a doubling, and it's become a normal part of being an American girl.
I want to pull this sentence from the book because it talks about this. The impact extends beyond self reported symptoms, with college students receiving a 134% increase in anxiety, a 106% increase in depression, a 72% increase in ADHD, and a 57% increase in bipolar disorder diagnosis since 2012. This surge in mental health challenge is, with the exception of some young millennials, largely confined to the Gen Z demographic. So, I'm wondering, obviously we have this data, but is I'm coming from a place of I fully believe that social media has an impact on this. But can
Yeah.
two things be true at once? That, like, it could be social media and it could be that this is more of a focal point of conversation. We have people talking about anxiety. We have people talking about like mental health and depression. Because I'm just thinking back personally to my childhood. I have many memories of near panic attacks around a very specific topic, but not having the verbiage or language to say, this is anxiety. But now that I have those skills as a 33-year-old woman, I know that the feeling is the exact same as that moment, that I can put myself back in time so clearly. So, is that also playing a role in the data?
Oh, so first, of course, yes. There's been many changes over the last 2 decades. We've had COVID, we've had, there was the financial crisis in 2008. All of these things impact kids' mental health. What we're trying to get at in the book is talking about a very sudden change that happened at a very specific moment in time, which was between 2010 and 2015. And so, like your point of the normalization of mental health and mental health conversations, reduced stigma, all of that is certainly playing some role. It's hard to know exactly how much. Part of the thing is that, there were a lot of campaigns around mental health stigma, reducing that in the 90s and the 2000s. Why 2012? Why 2013? What was it in that period that could explain why it was specifically among such a specific subset of people in so many countries around the world? So that's what we're kind of focusing on, is that yes, I think you're right that there's a lot of change in our ability of being aware of our symptoms and being able to talk about it. But we're seeing this in the self-report data, but also in going to emergency rooms
Right.
for
I was going
cutting
to say
behavior.
that's
And
like the big
right, so
telling
that's the
sign.
other side.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So it's certainly true that what you're talking about, but it's also, we're seeing it in behavioral data like self-harm and suicide as well. And, there's been many campaigns over the years to address these things.
Right. Can I also just push back for a second on that in
Yeah.
terms of the campaigns in past years? Because do I believe that social media can be harmful? 110%. And I want to dive into that as someone who spends majority of their life on social media. However, I do think that there are positives. And so part of that could be, just playing devil's advocate, when we have access to social media, maybe those campaigns didn't seem as personal, but like, for instance, my page, I talk a lot about mental health. I talk about my postpartum experience, all of these things. I get so many messages of, I've never heard this term used before, but this is exactly what I'm experiencing. Or, oh my gosh, this is pinpoint to what I thought I was the only one going through. So maybe the social media also helped in a campaign aspect of allowing people to have the language for this. But one thing for me that really stands out is that when I first heard this data, I'm like, okay, well, we also are in an epidemic of mass school shootings. Of course, these kids are going to be anxious and depressed and struggle with their mental health. But what's fascinating that you guys point out is that we're seeing this across the world. It's not a US specific thing. Can you talk to us about that?
Oh man, Cam, I want to say so many things, but yes. So just to speak to the international component, what was most striking to me is that when we look, for example, at the graphs of self-harm episodes among teen girls, we see nearly an identical pattern in Australia, in Canada, New Zealand, the UK. So 5 countries, the Anglosphere, it looks almost exactly the same. And then we see similar upward trends in depression and anxiety across many countries in Western Europe and throughout Scandinavia. A lot of the countries that have a lot of the solutions that we often point to around mental health care, and yet they're struggling with the same kind of thing. One thing that really brings all these countries together is that they all are very techno-optimists. They rapidly adopted technologies into their daily lives. Kids started using it much more at exactly this time. So that is part of what we really point to in the book, is that we're seeing these same patterns of behavior, these same mental health declines in countries that have very different Very different issues, very different problems, very different positive things. And yet we're seeing the same group of young people starting to suddenly experience
Right.
so much more anxiety and depression.
And can I ask another follow-up on that? Like, is social media just negatively impacting all of our mental health? Are we solely I'm just being honest, and I'll
Yeah,
speak from my own experience. I struggled with my mental health way before social media came into the picture, but I think I've gotten to a much better place now. However, when I initially started to become a more public-facing person with content creation and my social media platform, I experienced some things that I can't fathom being my 13-year-old
right.
self who didn't have a developed frontal lobe going through. And I mean, there were days where it was hard. And that's coming from, at the time, a late 20, confident, has all the tools, has a support system, human. And so are we all just kind of being yes, there are such positive impacts of social media, but being chronically online, which I unfortunately feel I am and I'm working on, isn't it just negatively impacting kind of all of us?
Yeah, and you hit on yes, and
Like,
you hit on the core point though, which is that there are periods of particular vulnerability, and
right.
this is what we really focus on in the book: is that young adolescents, especially when you're going through early puberty, when you're in seventh grade, it is such a hard time, anyways. But then when you strap in the entire internet and involve you move your whole social dynamic online, where anything you say can be spread around, it can be kept forever.
Mhm.
You're posting and you're counting up likes and shares. It's that dynamic that when you add that on top of an already difficult time, just makes it so much harder. And that's why we focus on young kids. But yes, it
Yeah.
impacts all of us in very different ways as parents. It's used in many ways, in similar ways to how kids use it, often as entertainment or distraction, to deal with difficult emotions, but also it makes us feel worse
Mhm.
often about our bodies and our lives. So yes, it can definitely have harms to adults. Ideally, as our frontal cortexes, our executive function gets stronger as we get older, we're better able to manage products that are designed to hook us, like alcohol, like any other product like that. So that's why we focus in the book on kids, less on adults. But that doesn't mean that it's just a walk in the park for us.
Right. I want to talk about the four harms that you guys are seeing and that you discuss in the book: social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. Can you walk us through those four harms and how we're seeing that negative impact on this specific generation?
Yeah. So I'd like to start with one that's called the opportunity cost. And what we talk about in the book is that the average teen now is spending an average of 5 hours a day just on social media
That's
and
insane.
8 to 10 hours a day on entertainment screen use. So on their phone or on their laptop. So 8 to 10 hours, where is all that time coming from? It has to come from something. And when you think about it, that's every day. It's not just one day in the week. So all of that time, so it's coming from time with friends, time sleeping, uh, reading books, uh, like paying attention for an extended period of time. All of that gets pushed out because all we have is such a little amount of time left after all of this time on our devices. So one of the biggest things that the phone has done is it's just pushed out all parts of childhood. And so that's the opportunity cost, which then brings us into social deprivation and sleep deprivation. So when we look at how much time young people have spent with their friends, not in school. It was typically in the past, like in the early 2000s, around 2 hours a day, and now it's around 20 minutes.
So
So
sad.
right, exactly. So we have that, and then we see similar kinds of trends for sleep, where the percentage of teens who are sleeping for at least 7 hours a night, which is still not really enough, um, that has gone up 10, 15% of kids now are even more sleep deprived. And when you combine these things, sleep deprivation, social deprivation, plus the added stressors of being online. Those are the factors, when we put them all together, is really what we believe is can drive so much more anxiety, depression, and stress.
I mean, it just has me thinking about having this conversation with a friend of mine around Christmas time, and he has a son, I forget, maybe 8, 9, who has an iPhone, and he was saying that he's up until, like, 11 PM FaceTiming his friends, and I'm not saying that that's not a good use of technology, FaceTime, like, sure, obviously, it's ideal to be with a human interacting face to face, but that's not the reality for many relationships. What if the friend lives far away? Whatever. But up until 11 p.m., you need to be asleep. You are a small child. And I think it's hard for adults to put their phones down at night. Like I observe that with myself. But for us to expect young children to know how to do it just seems dumb, quite honestly. If we're gonna be frank, I think the biggest thing for me that now that I'm a parent, I think about, well, 2 things. One is the fear of what's online
Hmm.
because the access that people have to these young children, or just the fact that everything is so permanent and it lives there,
Yeah.
that scares me. But it's also the loss of the what is the terminology you guys use? The phone play versus,
So we call it the play-based childhood.
thank you so much. The lack of that, and it's something my husband and I talk about a lot because he grew up in a very neighborhood, um, like neighborhood, I guess, and I didn't, but he had this, like, lawn area behind all of the houses within this
Hmm.
cul-de-sac, and everyone was always playing sports and all this stuff, and when we would go back to his parents' house after college, so around this time, 2015-ish, he would always comment on how sad it is that he never saw any kids in that plot of land playing, and he knew that these kids existed in these houses, but they weren't out there, and I actually feel very grateful that my neighborhood, you're constantly hearing kids playing now. I do have hope for the generation below Gen Z, which I want to get into,
Yeah.
but it's something that makes me feel sad because we're taking that opportunity from them. They don't know any better. And I think that that's our job as parents to like provide that space for them. Before we dive into the generation being raised right now who's a little younger than Gen Z, I also want to circle back. Why are we seeing such a dramatic increase in girls more so than boys? Is there data on that of the why?
Yeah, just to tap into what you were just saying before real quick,
Yeah.
is I think your husband's experience is so important.
So
And this is
90s.
to so 90s, but
So
also
90s.
why this issue is so urgent, because very soon there's not going to be people who have that memory. One of the most important things that
That's
we have as
crazy.
parents is that we know that there's a different kind of childhood, a different kind of experience that we can have growing up.
Mhm.
This is the last generation that can make that change. And that's what kind of the role that we have as
Yeah.
parents and adults, to give kids time to just have a normal childhood. So that is kind of my call to action.
Yeah.
But to your question of why girls and boys, it's looking so different, we have 2 chapters on this in the book. So if anybody wants to dive deeper, the key thing is that the technology companies, social media companies in particular, have crafted their platforms in a way that has maximized as much time as they can get from their users. And they've been really, really good at learning about what makes their users tick. And so for social media companies, especially for the visually oriented ones like Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, girls moved most quickly and most rapidly and spend the most time on those platforms. And so those platforms are really catered in ways that appeal to um, girls on average, their drives and needs. And boys did not move as much into those platforms, but rather they moved much more into gaming and pornography, which generally, on average, is framed in a way that appeals much more to them. And so for social media and girls, so much of it has to do with relational aggression and gossip, visual social comparison. These are the kinds of things that especially during kind of the rapid changes during puberty, are very difficult. Um, that's where we see for girls in particular, the the visual social comparison, the perfectionism, the kind of, male aggression tends to be more physical. So we've actually seen a decline in bullying over the last few decades, but a big rise in online bullying.
Right.
And
I was
online
gonna
bullying
say.
can, right.
Yeah.
So it's a shift into relational aggression, which is more common among girls. And so now girls can go home and they're followed into the bathroom, into their bedroom with their phone, with their bully. So there's no, and this is a key point that I wanted to bring up, is that before smartphones and social media, we had natural constraints. We couldn't, bring everything that happened in school home with us, into the bathroom. Now that we have our phone, we're constantly connected 24/7, and there's no break. And that in itself is something that's very difficult to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, I think about the fact, I say this all the time, but the fact that in high school, I was in high school in 2006 to 2009. If you weren't invited to something, you would see it maybe on Monday when someone posts a 40 picture Facebook album. But at that point, it's already happened. It's like that hurts, but well, there's nothing I can do about it now. I can't imagine living that real time and observing it on social media. And even as an adult, this happens where I have a very fascinating lens on this whole scenario because I am someone who's unfortunately chronically online and my husband
Mm,
has no social media. And so it's fascinating to observe how we perceive situations or know about things.
right.
So
Interesting.
I will, we have couples who are good friends, for instance, and all know that the girl, through her Instagram stories, that they're doing XYZ. And I'll say to him, like, oh, did you see they're there with these people? Like, kind of insinuating, why weren't we invited? And he's like, no. Why do you care? And I'm like, why do you not care? And why do you not know? And he's like, I only know information that people give me. And that's
Mm,
such an interesting gift to only know the details that you actually need to know. Like, I don't need to know who's going out to dinner together or where they're going or when they're on vacation with another couple. I don't need to know those specific details real time whatsoever. So it's really interesting for me, especially in our decision when our children get older, of wow, I am so grateful for social media for giving me the opportunities I have and for my career and for the incredible community I've built. I think I would rather live in his brain,
mm.
which is confusing for me to navigate because this is now my career, if that makes sense. Um,
Absolutely.
what are we seeing in the difference? Like, is it the social media or is it the technology? Or is it the combination of the two?
Mhm. That's a really good question. What we talk about in the book is that it's not social media per se by itself. It's specifically the combination of smartphones and social media and the way that they came together and influence each other over time. And so, just to give like a little bit of a sense of what I mean, is that when the smartphone came out in, I think it was 2007, it was super simple. Like you couldn't do that much on it. It was more of just like a tool that we could use. You call people, you could access the internet, but it wasn't much. But then in 2008, you get the App Store, and that really starts to change everything because now every company wants to get your attention and they start competing with each other. And so now you get all of the apps that we're talking about. And then we start to get like much more hyper viral social media. And this is the key. In 2009, social media like Facebook adds the like button, retweet button on Twitter. And what that does is it changed social media from being something about social networking. People used to call it social networking systems into a social media platform, which is what people say today. So we move from we're connecting with known people into we are now on a stage performing to an audience to be judged. That becomes much more of the average experience of being online. And it's that change. Plus, you get the front facing camera. Plus, you get Instagram in 2010, which is the first social media platform to be designed for a smartphone. Nothing else before that was designed specifically in that way. And so, what we get is a very different kind of social media. And this is the kind of social media that wants you to stay on your phone as long as you can. And so, it just keeps growing. And by 2012, this is the period when young teens are spending now every day on these platforms for multiple hours every day. So that's the big shift. It's the combination of the two.
What is I have theories, but what does the self like forward facing camera play a role in this?
Well, so I think there are a number of things going on here. One is just it it's a great just symbolism of
Agreed.
how all of this changed, which is that our gaze turned inward all the time. Now we have a mirror to our face 24/7. And you know, part of the issue with the front facing camera is this is the same time that you start getting beauty filter apps. You start getting all of the things that make us start to obsess over our physical appearance, and the ways that social media has amplified this long-standing trend that we were moving away from, which is the focus on very idealized physical beauty and all of these things. And now it just ramped that up 100%, again during a period when we feel most awkward about our bodies, which is during puberty. And so that's kind of a key reason why the front facing camera plus Instagram plus these, you get Snapchat and you get all of these other platforms that are all designed about taking photos and videos of yourself and your lives on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, I can make the argument for positive outcomes of social media, but
Yeah.
I don't see one positive output when it comes to filters and Facetune and all
Yeah.
of those things. I truly do not think one positive thing exists in those. So I have many of thoughts on that. I guess my next question is, where do we go from here? Myself and many of my listeners are raising, I don't even know what the name of the generation is, but I
It's Gen Alpha is
Gen
what
is
they're
that what it is?
called.
Gen Alpha, and they're below
Yeah.
Gen Z, or is there one in between?
Right.
Okay.
They're the ones right below Gen Z.
So what do we do? Like, how do we I, I mean, obviously, I think this calls for more higher up change, which, we've seen the meta introduction of the kids' accounts. So maybe there's steps being taken in the correct direction. But I also think that we can try to make some changes for our own families to help
Yeah.
combat this, hopefully. Otherwise, that would be really depressing. So, can we? And if so, what do we do?
Yeah. So we propose four big ideas in the book for what we can do, and the kind of the central idea that all of those solutions are around is, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts
Yeah,
and how old your kids are, um, is the idea that trying to limit once you give your kid a phone, it becomes a constant fight over screen time. Um, and so one, you have to deal with that. Two, it's really hard to set limits and to say no to kids when everybody else has an Instagram account, has a phone. And what we call this in a book is a collective action problem, where if one 13-year-old, if you decide that your 13-year-old daughter, you don't want to give her a phone, well, she's going to be the only one not to have it. And she might feel even worse. And you as a parent feel terrible for having to say no. And so every parent, many parents that we've met feel this tension.
totally.
And so everybody continues to give kids phones, kids social media. And at that age just keeps getting younger and younger and younger. In the UK now, 25% of 5 to 7-year-olds have a smartphone.
What?
So it's just, yeah. So at the age of getting the phones, getting these devices, it's just becoming all consuming. And so what we propose in the book is that we have to act together, parents acting together with other parents. I mean, of course, we want government tech companies to change, but we can do a lot ourselves. So the four norms are: one, no smartphones until high school; no social media until 16, phone-free schools, which is really starting to take off. And the other side of the story is much more free play, independence, responsibility in the real world. So not just taking things away, but also giving things back.
So I can share my thoughts and experiences. Basically, I mean, I remember being in 5th grade. So what is that, 12? And having a shared Nokia phone with my older sister who was in 8th grade. And we
Mm.
were in the same middle school. So she kept it in her locker. And it was really just call mom if there's an emergency or to play Snake like on the way to and from school.
I love
But
Snake.
that was what we had. And I have thought a lot about this, or my husband and I have, in terms of technology, and I want to dive into this in a second. But with our son, we have a 3.5-year-old and a 1-year-old. So the 1-year-old's not much applicable in this conversation, but my 3.5-year-old, he doesn't have his own tablet. He only is allowed to watch TV on a television. That was a boundary that I don't even think we realized it until we had kind of said it because I didn't want him, and this is coming from a judgment-free place, but I didn't want him watching shows on my phone when we took him out to a restaurant, or I didn't want him thinking he had access to his shows whenever he wanted. And we tell him that now. He understands it. Like, he doesn't get to tell us he's watching something. If he wants to ask for it, fine, we can have a conversation. But, there are times where there's absolutely no TV. That's before school, that's during mealtime. He'll go a full week without watching something. And then on a Saturday, we'll watch an entire Toy Story. So it's kind of depends on the week. And we do use it more of like, if they both are going bonkers and I'm alone, for instance, and I need to cook dinner for them, then yes, we will put on an episode of Miss Rachel and you guys can sit there and watch it while I cook and prepare dinner. But I think so much of how we are trying to parent is in that play-based focus where, we allow our kids a lot of independent play.
Mm.
We maybe allow our 3.5-year-old a little too much independence because I trust him a little too much of like around the house or doing things, running in and out of our neighbor's house, our neighborhood. I feel so blessed, specifically my two direct neighbors. We have a very like open door, drop off play date vibe, play in the
That's
backyard.
wonderful.
You can yell. And I think that's such a gift and such a privilege that I have to acknowledge. I think also a lot of parents feel guilty when it comes to this technology conversation because quite honestly, like parents are fucking struggling. We just saw that it's the Surgeon General said that there is a mental health crisis for parents. I think so many parents turn to technology as a tool to help because we don't have the villages that we once had. And I think that has to be acknowledged. Miss Rachel has been joked to be like the best babysitter, but it's true because
Mm.
it's free. Some people can't actually afford the childcare that may be needed to physically cook a meal to feed the children, just as an example. So I think that there's privilege that needs to be acknowledged in that. But I also think that we are all, my friends and I, starting to have the conversations of when will they get phones? Will we try to do this around the same time? But I think so much of it you can't control because I'm not friends with every parent that he's in school with. And that's why I think something like what Meta did, and I would love your thoughts on the kid accounts, like if they are ever on social media, look, my hope is that they're not, which I know is crazy because I'm on social media, but I'm gonna kind of lean on the fact that my husband's not and like try to show them that this is mommy's work, but like I also can drink coffee and drink alcohol and you can't. You don't get to do everything I get to do.
Yeah.
And I think if it did happen, if they were on social media, I would want full access to the accounts. I would set time locks of when they're allowed to be on them. A lot of what Meta kind of released with these kid accounts. Do you have thoughts on that release of what they did?
Yeah, it's definitely a step in the right direction. It's the first thing they've
Right.
done ever, pretty much. The problem is, as you're saying, it's just like there are too many platforms, there are too many parental controls.
Agreed.
Parents are stressed out. We need a better system. So, speaking to tech companies, the best thing that we can do is we need to have what we call like device-based age verification. You have a phone and you can set up a child version of an account and a parent has control over that. And that would enable all of the apps to have to follow certain
That's
guidelines to
smart.
treat your phone, treat like the phone has to treat the child as if it must know that it's a child.
Right,
So
so it would
rather
almost
than
start with
having to
Apple.
do, yes, we need to go up to the top.
All right, Steve,
Um,
come on.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So there are things that can be done. And yeah, in the meantime though, I think you're so right around parental stress, that this is such a huge issue. And ideally, governments and tech companies can help out here, make it easier at least to manage the screen sides of things. And to one of the other things that we really recommend and talk about in the book, and it sounds like um, you've been able to do this a bit in your life, is giving that more freedom, independence to kids. And part of that process is that we don't always need to be supervising our kids, and that is a huge layer of stress. We're
Yeah.
doing this all alone. And part of what we want to do, and what we believe, is that schools actually can be a huge part of the solution here, not just on the phone side, but also on the play side.
Interesting.
Because having the schools open up the playground like an hour before school, an hour after school, where the kids can just play together without much adult presence. You can have one
Yeah.
adult there. That is a way to try to recreate your husband's backyard play
Right.
that's really hard to create now because we just don't have that set up. So we need to leverage the institutions that we have to make it easier for everyone, for parents, for kids.
Absolutely. I mean, I will
Yeah.
say there's a school in my neighborhood that allows us to have access to their playground before and after school hours. And, we have a text chain of like heading over now. And it's just all of the kids know that they can meet up there. Like we have a full group. They are playing. It just brings me so much
Mm.
joy and like gratitude for our area. And I know that that is not what everyone experiences. So I do feel that privilege. But it's really remarkable to observe because that's, I think, the childhood that so the kids deserve at the end of the day.
Yes.
Like that's what it is. With that, I want to also talk about phone-free schools. What are we seeing there? What is the data showing us? And like, is there hope for this to become the norm? Because that's kind of
Yeah.
my ideal, to be honest.
Well, I think this is one of the most exciting things that's happening, because it's not just happening here in the US. This is an international phenomenon that's happening right now. And what we're seeing, I mean, we're very kind of in the early stages here of schools just in September starting to try this out. Um, and, there's a lot of different approaches happening, but what we're really looking for and most excited about are the schools that go bell to bell, where kids have either yonder pouches, you just put in a pouch, you don't have it for the rest of the day, or you put it into a phone locker. And what that does, and what we've heard, is, so this is not just you don't have access to your phone during class time, but also during lunch and at recess. Because what teachers have been saying for many years is that the lunchroom has gone silent.
That's so sad.
Recess is so quiet. The hallways are silent. And what people are saying, and we've heard this so often, is like, we're hearing laughter again. Um, and teachers are like, I have to ask the class to quiet down. Like, things that you never would imagine like would be an issue,
Right.
um, are all of these things are coming back up once you remove this kind of the phone, the experience blocker that is blocking kids' not just ability to learn and to focus, but also to socialize and connect with each other, and not also feel the pressure that, somebody is going to record me eating in
Right.
the lunchroom. We can take a lot of those pressures away very easily.
What are we seeing that on the flip side has actually been positive with social media and technology? Because yes, while I think that it has negative impacts, I can also wholeheartedly agree that it has brought community to maybe those, I think of someone who is potentially transgender in a very Republican state who doesn't have that community of people and finds that community online. Like, what positives did you guys find during your research in terms of social media?
Yeah, I think there are a couple like distinctions that I like to make here when talking about the pros and cons. One is distinguishing the internet more broadly and social media in particular.
Okay.
So platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat that are designed to hook you and to grab your attention, to sell to advertisers, that have this particular business model. Those generally, I really think the net is negative.
Okay.
There's a lot of harm. But more broadly, the internet, the ability to find information, to watch videos, to blogs, all of those are much more beneficial in my view. The other thing I like to distinguish between are search functions and social functions. And so when you go to YouTube and you want to learn about something, you yourself, you have this intention, you write in something, you ask a question, you can find information. That's great. The problem is more of the social functions. It's the when you add in the metrics, the likes, the shares, the retweets, having your own profile, having to update that, having other people be able to contact you, that's where more of the problems start to come in. And that's also where we think like that's really where the age distinction really matters. You know, if kids want to search for stuff and then also be able to connect in more controlled ways through texting or whatever, that's fine. It's entering into this new social kind of universe
Right.
that is more
But
problematic.
can I play devil's advocate on
Yeah,
that?
please.
Because if I'm going to use my example of a transgender child in a very conservative place, for them to, for example, go on YouTube to find a video of someone, that other person has to be the creator that has to have access to the, like, I just think that that's where it gets confusing, because in order for there to be physical content for that person to consume and find that said community, the other side of the coin has to exist. And I don't know, I don't think there's an answer, because I even say this about myself. Like, I don't want to be scrolling on the apps. However, part of my job is knowing what's happening, what's on trend, different audios, and I've worked in ways to hire people that know that, so that doesn't have to be me, because I notice that it negatively impacts my mental health, because then I'm the face of that said product we create.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. That's where I think it's really hard, quite
Yeah,
honestly.
it's a really good question, and I'm curious what you think. Like, should 12-year-olds be able to content produce to put
Absolutely
out
not.
to the world? Okay, so then we can create a marker. And I think
Right.
that that's kind of what we're proposing is that, yes, you can be content creators after like a minimum age.
Right.
So we say, just like with driving, like you can't do certain things until you're 14, 16.
Well, no,
And
I mean, it
then,
makes sense that we have all these markers for other things. You can't
right,
drive, you can't drink, you can't buy cigarettes, you can't vote. Like, that's what's crazy to me, that that marker doesn't exist. Maybe it exists, but no one follows it. I don't even know if it exists. But I mean, we see these TikToks of these like 9-year-olds with skincare routines at Sephora. And I'm like, what the fuck are you doing?
yeah,
It makes me so angry. I just want to,
right.
yeah, quickly go back for 1 second about like the young children. For those of us who are raising these, what'd you say it was? Alpha generation? Gen
Gen
Alpha?
Alpha.
Um, is there a fear, or are there guidelines that we should be following around technology? I know I kind
Uh,
of shared mine, but I would obviously like a professional
yeah.
opinion.
you know, um, so we have a lot of resources for parents generally on our website at anxiousgeneration.com. We also do some work with Dr. Becky, who has a
Love
lot of
her.
great advice for young kids. And then we also have a Substack called Afterbabble, so afterbabble.com, where we have a bunch of essays that do talk about kind of different age groups and different relationships with technology. And yeah, I think the thing that we're really trying to push back against is the stat of 50% of kids saying that they're online almost constantly, that you're constantly thinking about being online, you're constantly online. And that is only possible through having internet connected smartphones, personal devices all the time. So that's the primary issue that we're concerned about. Light use, watching shows once in a while, having parents around who are caring and concerned about it. We're generally, that's not what we're talking about. And that's fine. To watch shows while you're making dinner or occasionally using it as a babysitter, like that's part of what it is to grow up today. What we're really, again, just trying to push back against is what happens when you give the personal device that you essentially as a parent lose total control, and it becomes a constant conflict over screen time.
Yeah, and I think also so much of this, unfortunately, obviously falls on the parent, but I notice this already, and I think it's just going to continue to be more of a thing as my kids get older of leading by example in that sense of like no phones at the dinner table. And that includes myself and my husband. And, putting our phone away so that when we are playing with them, we are actually playing. We're not sitting there. I allow a lot of independent play, but I try to make it very clear like, okay, I'm going to be at my desk working right now, you can play instead of sitting next to him, semi playing, semi on my phone, semi playing, semi checking my text. Like, I think it's really easy to fall into that loop as a parent of we all are chronically online and constantly available. And so setting those boundaries, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I just want to add in one more thing.
Yeah.
The other day I came across this essay that was just like, it really like hit me. It's her name's Catherine Martinko, and she wrote this essay about parenting in the digital age. And she was talking about how, you know, as a parent, we might be walking around, we're texting, we're scheduling, we're looking at our calendar, we are checking our email, maybe we're getting reservations for dinner, but all a kid sees is the back of a phone.
Right.
And to us, it's like, what we're doing is really important. We're not just wasting our time, but a lot of the times all kids see is like, this is what life is, and this is more important than the kid.
Yeah.
And I was really struck by that. And so I totally agree. I think the one of the best things that we can do as adults and as parents is to try to set constraints again and boundaries around our own screen use, around mealtime, around time before bed, because yeah, kids follow what adults do. But also, like you said, that doesn't mean that we can't drink or whatever. Like,
Right.
there are things kids can do, but we can also set healthy behavior patterns that we hope our kids will also follow.
Yeah, it's something I'm constantly working on, both my husband and I.
Same.
My last question is what are your thoughts or feelings or opinions on the pushback of the book being based in like fear mongering? What do you have to say about that?
I think what we've experienced overall is that every teacher, parent, principal, anyone who works with kids, they don't disagree with us. What we find is that everybody is struggling with this. And the number one feeling that most people have is just resignation, that
Right.
there's nothing that we can do. This is just how the world is, and we have to adapt. So what we found is not that the book is causing more fear generally. It's that it's actually providing a sense of agency and choice and ability that we can do something about this. Um, I think that it's a very normal academic debate going on around the degree of risk and harm from these platforms. But we know from the company's own internal research that's constantly coming out, we know from our own eyewitness testimony of what parents think, of what teachers think. Um, and so, the real question that we just ask in the book is, are we okay with 10-year-olds making their own Instagram accounts and spending 5 hours a day on those platforms? Very few people that I know say yes to that question. And so then the question is, what can we do about it? And
Right.
that's what the book is trying to do.
Yeah, I don't think I know anyone that would say yes to that question. To close, this is more personal, less book focused, but it's obviously integrated because it talks about mental health. How do you personally fill your cup and prioritize your mental health?
Mm. Well, I've noticed that I've gotten way too online as
Yeah.
well.
Yep. We all
and
have.
so and so I have just started a technology Shabbat. So
My friend
sundown to
just did
sundown.
this.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are
So
you
Friday
Jewish?
night, I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Friday night to Saturday night. I'm only one weekend, but it was amazing. I was, disconnected. My whole thing was I don't want access to the internet. I could text people. It's the constant availability
Yeah.
and social media and email. And I cut that out. And, I just felt like the weekend felt longer. I read like half of a book, like all of this stuff that I just haven't had time to do. So I'm trying to set my own constraints and boundaries in a boundaryless world.
Yeah.
And, I hope that I add more to that in my life.
I love that. My friend, literally, we just had this conversation about this exact thing. And there's 1 week every year that I spend at the beach and I go off social media fully from work, but also from consuming. And at one point before I had kids, I did used to literally put my phone in a drawer and I would only check it like 30 minutes a day. Now that needs to come back. But I think it's so important. It's really, really important. And it's also hard. So, like, good for you. Um, Thank you so much for coming on here and for sharing all of this. For people who want more of what you're doing, where can they best support you?
Yeah. So thank you, Cam. And thanks to your audience. You can find all of our information at anxiousgeneration.com. You can sign up at the bottom to be a part of our movement where we're trying to roll back the phone based childhood and restore the play based childhood. And for writing and updates, you can also look at our Substack After Babel.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.